Hello, welcome back to the workshop. Bit of a recap if you're a new viewer. My name's Tom Cheesewright. This is my 99 BMW Z3 with electric power that me and my eldest daughter put together during lockdown. It's powered by a Toyota Prius inverter, a control board by EV-BMW, Damien Maguire over in Ireland, some batteries from a BMW hybrid and a bunch of other assorted parts from various cars. Right now, I'm doing some upgrades for it, and I'm doing them on that over there. This is my other 1999 BMW Z3. Eventually this is going to be another electric car with a body kit on it also. But right now it's the kind of development mule for all the upgrades to that. Which means I'm in the middle of putting in a bigger motor, rearranging the engine bay to make it a bit neater, putting in a new battery box, subject of this episode, and also test fitting this. The Z300S body kit from Tribute Automotive, which eventually will be going on that. All clear? In the last episode, finally got the power steering pump fitted. Still a little bit of fettling required, a bit of reinforcement maybe, but it's there, it's in place, tucked away, as you'll see from the arrow on the screen. Next step is to add the battery box. Obvious reasons you want the battery box securely mounted. It's full of very heavy batteries. You also want it as far back in the car as possible. But in this, it probably has to go kind of over, if not slightly in front of, the front wheels. No different really though to where a lot of the weight in the original engine was. This thing used to have a dirty grey iron block straight 6 in it. Not light. So the plan is to mount the battery box here. Probably use the original engine mounts here and here to secure it at the back. And at the front, probably add some new brackets, and I've checked you can add small brackets according to the authorities. Add some new brackets where the old water radiator brackets were, since we're now using a much smaller radiator. I don't really want to add those brackets though onto this, the development car, because I only have to cut them off again because the arrangement of what's going in here is going to be completely different. So, can we make up the battery box mounts without, at least not permanently welding stuff onto these chassis rails? This is the battery box. That's roughly where it's going to go, albeit held up on concrete blocks for now, rather than actually mounted in. The box is made from sheet steel and some 20mm box section. It's not the lightest construction, but my fabrication skills aren't amazing, and it's nice and strong. It also makes mounting it nice and easy because I can just weld onto this box. And looking at it, a couple of things come to mind. Firstly, at the front here, these uprights align pretty nicely with the front edge of where the old radiator mounts used to be. So something that ties in there would work quite nicely. And at the back, you can tell this isn't quite straight relative to the chassis rails, and we probably need to come up a little bit to make some clearance for the hydraulic connections on the power steering rack. But if we just came up about 20mm on the back off this motor mounting plate, actually that'd be a pretty good location. Now in terms of the mounts, what I want to be able to do ideally is crane the whole battery box in and out, so once it's closed I don't have to keep opening it up and taking battery modules out individually. In order to do that, what you want is to be able to drop the battery box in from the top. So we need some mounts that sit underneath part of the box and ideally locate mechanically forwards and backwards, as well as holding it upright. That will mean we can sort of crane it in and then drop some bolts in from the top just to secure it. But that mechanical connection will be the one that stops it going backwards and forwards, because the last thing you want is a big heavy battery box shooting forward when you hit the brakes. So, can I come up with some mounts that will weld onto these chassis rails that don't make too much of a change, that allow this to just sort of drop down on, and something at the back that provides the same function? Okay, I had a cup of tea and a think, and I have the answer. 40 by 40 box section. In 2 different places, well 3 actually. At the back here, 3 threw a bit of scrap 20 by 20 in, and that gives us that brings it almost level with the chassis rails. A little bit of tweaking to do, but that's almost right. So as a starting point, we're going to split a piece of 40 by 40 box into an L shape, weld that on to the 20 by 20 at the bottom with an offset, so that the flat part sits on this motor mount here, and will give us loads of space for a couple of holes to drill down to go into some captive nuts on the bottom. And again, there's loads of space in the middle there for captive nuts, so we can just drop our bolt straight down, and that will give us location. And in order to give us the mechanical location, I'll probably stick a lip onto this motor plate when it's finalised, so that gives us that sort of forward and back mechanical location. Maybe actually some lips for side-to-side location as well, to make sure some bolts will do that, but just to make doubly sure that it doesn't move from side to side. And that actually is easy to locate when you're craning it in. And then at the front, again, more 40 by 40 box. Going to come off the chassis rails, a bit like this. Profile, cut some profile into here in order to fit around here, and weld those on. And then on here, we'll make some sort of sleeves for this, some U-shaped sleeves, and so that they sort of drop down and locate over the top. And again, you can just drop a bolt in each side into a principle on the other side to locate it. And as you can see from the height of that, it's going to drop down a little bit, but by the time that's all together, that'll work out quite nicely. And I think it should be just about level. So, all good. Time to start cutting. Unfortunately, after the last episode where I rewired this, changed the fuse, and got it running again, this promptly died. Don't know what's wrong with it. The brushes seem to be fine. The connections seem to be fine inside. No obvious source of issue, but it's just not going. Which, given the abuse it's had, and the fact that I bought this, I'm going to say 12, maybe 15 years ago, and it's had a pretty hard life, as you can tell from that. Okay, I never cleaned it. From all the muck around it. It's probably not the greatest surprise in the world. So it might be time to buy a nicer mains angle grinder. Fortunately, although it slows me down, because I have to keep changing the heads and cutting discs and flat wheels, I do have my lovely Makita battery powered one. So can crack on, albeit it's really nice having the mains one and a flat wheel on it, just to keep things moving nice and quickly. Right, our back plate's tacked on. It would have been smart to drill holes first, but forgot about that. I say tacked, slightly more than tacked. Anyway, it's on. And we can think about the front pieces now. What I will do is when I come back and weld all this up, I will cut a piece of matching bar to go behind it to reinforce it, so that when it's craned out and sat on the floor, it's not sat on this plate. It's sat on this piece of 20 by 20, and that will also reinforce the plate, ensure it doesn't go anywhere. It does mean we have to rethink where the lip goes, whether it's going to be sat on, but we can worry about that later. I've been thinking about how to do the mounts on here for a while, and how to get this profile and transfer it to metal. And I spotted one of these being advertised. one profile. Albeit we don't actually want this lip. So what we really want to do is come down here and copy that onto some steel. Pretty cool. Tiny bit of fettling needed, but that's actually a really nice fit. Might take a little bit off the edge just so that it slots back perfectly. Question what to do is now, because I don't really want to be welding much on here that I then have to cut off. But actually what I might do is, how am I going to tack that on? I might not. I might make these bits up, make up the sleeves to the other side, and then when they're bolted together, then we can be able to drop the battery box in, and they'll just sit on there, and then weld them on the 300. These brackets will probably come off anyway on this one. I can't imagine I'm going to need the scale of radiator that we go in here, and I want the space instead. But they will all come off as I do the big restoration of this car. This car is going to get a full cleanup before it starts being converted to electric. So yeah, pleased with that. Need to make another one. Then need to look at some sleeves and work out exactly how long this needs to be. With our brackets sorted, we need to think about a sleeve that's going to sit over them. If this is attached to the chassis rail, something needs to be attached to the battery box. And I have an idea for that. Obviously, more 40 by 40 box section won't go over the top. But if we cut it in half, in both ways, and then weld it back together again with a bit of a space in, we should get just about the right tolerance to drop it over the top. And that one piece ought to do us both our sleeves with a bit of luck. Maybe actually for extra strength we cut it on the bias so that we've got more attached to the corner here to give us that right angle strength. I think that kind of works. Quite neat too. Except it's not going to be welded on up there, it's going to be welded on more like down here, isn't it? Like that. So what we probably do actually is put an extra bit of 20 by 20 behind it, weld that in first, and then we've got the strength we need to attach that. Or actually, even better option, we could use a little bit more 40 by 40, cut it a bit longer so that it stretches back and welds in around the 40 by 40. That's neater rather than an extra bit of 20 by 20. Let's do that. Shame we don't get to use up this bit of scrap, but I'm sure I'll find a use for it down the line. Need to finish up for the day, but I think we're at a really good point. So we've got our brackets, which are going to go onto the chassis rails at the front. We've got our two halves, let me get this right, of sleeve, which are going to, hang on, other way around. Two halves of sleeve, which are going to go onto the battery box, and then kept the plates from the that were cut off the bottom of these to provide us something to weld to connect those back together, and then I'll come up from the underside and weld as well. So we've got nice strong brackets, and then we'll cut some of this away. Once it's welded up, we'll cut 20mm away, and that will weld around the 20x20, which is part of the battery box. So we'll have it welded across the bottom there, across the top there, across there, nice and strong. And then these should, we'll have to make sure we leave space for this, just slot down there. When it's all welded up, we'll have to wait till it's all welded together. We'll drop a hole down the middle here and a riv nut in here. Only needs to be a riv nut because it's only locating it vertically. All the weight will be going down, and the lateral stabilization will be there, and it will also be stabilized horizontally in sort of the other lateral direction, because the 20x20 will almost be butting up against there. It won't quite, there'll be a little bit of movement, but it won't be able to go far. So that should all be really strong. Got to finish up for today, but when I come back to the workshop, doesn't matter for you, but for me, for next week, I'll be able to get that finished up with a bit of luck. An upgrade on my old supermarket special angle grinder, probably B&Q special actually. Gone for the lower power of the Makita mains ones. I think this is 720 watt as opposed to 840, but it has the advantage, if I can get my fingers in here, that the body is nice and thin, so you can get a really good grip on it. And all the reviews are really good, so it's plenty powerful enough. And it's more Makita, so what's not to like? It's going to be really awkward if another brand decides when this channel, if this channel ever gets more subscribers, they want to sponsor it. Makita, get your act together. Quick review on first use. What an absolute joy. The really noticeable thing is it feels like there's much less rotating mass than there is on, more than there was on my old one. The old one, you got a real sense of sort of, you know, you like spin a gyroscope, you ever like spin a bike wheel in your hands and you try and turn it and it resists you. Much less of that with this, much more controllable. It's obviously, it's lighter as well. But it's sort of, it's quieter, it feels less powerful, but still clean the piece up very, very quickly. Yeah, really pleased with that. Bit of welding and grinding off camera, and I won't lose it, still, yeah, a bit hot from the grinding. And on to the next step for our, what are they? Sheathy bits. So I will drill a hole in the top, cut one side of this off, and then we can get those welded in. These are now ready to go on. I have to be careful because they're still a bit hot from the grinder. So I've added back a bit of metal there so that this is 20mm again. Don't focus on my fingers, focus on the thing. So that this is 20mm again, so that it should sit nice and flush with the frame. I'll show you, actually it's probably easier if I can pick this up without frying my fingers. Yep, good. That's the wrong side. Like that. So it gives me extra space to weld to as well. So you need to set that height. So you need to get it in the car now. Jiggle it up and down so it gets the right height, tack it in, then pull it out, weld it out. and then put it back in, and maybe try and clamp up the flange, the bracket, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be welded into the car, and then drill through. I've put an 8mm hole in the top here, drill through that hole, and install our riv nuts. Or actually, might it make more sense to install those when the brackets are welded in, so we know they're not going to move? Yes, that might make a lot more sense. Let's do that when it's installed. Just before I think about welding the sleeves on, actually on these sides somewhere, I need to actually finish up the mountings to the battery modules themselves. So I designed this pack with a bit of extra width for cabling, to make sure that it's not sort of squashed or rubbing, but I don't want the modules just to be sort of sliding around in here. Instead, I'm going to be using these holes which have bolts going through them. Normally, I'm going to run long strips of, long lengths of threaded bar, M6 threaded bar, right across the pack on both sides, holding all the modules together, with some 3D printed spaces in the middle, which reminds me, I must actually make sure I've got the right size of 3D printed spacer, because I designed them originally based on all the modules facing the same way, but that doesn't actually work for the wiring, so I may need to tweak those modules and print some up over the weekend to make sure I've got the right shapes and the right number to space them out nicely, and that'll just give a bit of cushioning and stop them moving around. So I need to measure up and mark out these holes, drill through the sheet, but obviously the sheet's not particularly strong, and yes, I'm probably completely over engineering things here. I've cut some bar, I can hear Paul Compton shouting at the screen already that I'm overdoing this, but I've got some threaded bar there for the holes will go through, and then we'll just have nuts on each end holding it all together, and then that pack will be incredibly secure, incredibly well fixed, and not going anywhere, and then I can sort of crane it in and out with confidence. Might need to put some couple of loops on here so I can use the balance beam to crane it in and out once it's all assembled. There we go, holes drilled, well actually more than holes drilled, bars welded in, holes drilled. I did all this a little bit quickly, if I'm honest, and it's not perfectly straight. Not that anyone's ever going to see that, but a little disappointed it's not a little bit neater. I sort of eyeballed it based off where the holes were rather than sort of measuring it up a bit better, but it's fine, it'll be very strong, it'll be nicely tucked away. And by the time there's some bolts on there, or rather some nuts on there and some seam sealer and everything else, you're never going to know. There we go, got these lined up at the right height, matching height down from each side, spirit level on. I had been trying to level it against these rails and realised these rails aren't actually straight, they actually sort of come up towards the front of the car. So I've tried to sort of level it out against the rest of the frame so it'll look fairly consistent, it'll look fairly flat. Just tacked in for now. I had to do some trimming. I knew I'd cut it slightly too wide because I wanted a fairly close fit. So I just had to make sort of trim it down in 3 places at the back, on these sides, and at the front here. Still needs a little bit of cleaning up, but nothing I can't do with the finger sander once it's off. Partly in preparation for paint, because obviously all this will need painting. So pull it apart now and get it welded up. Sorry I've not been filming so much, just in a bit of a rush. Really want to get this battery box done this week so we can focus on plumbing and wiring, the high voltage junction box and stuff next week, and actually swapping it all over to the new car. Don't look at those welds. They're not my best. But they're done. So that is the battery box basically finished. I'll try and finish up with a shot of it all together when the welds have cooled down a little bit. Just waiting for them to cool off before I sort of get in there with the grinder and tidy them up a little bit. Like I say, not my finest, but you know, strong enough. So that wraps it up for this episode. Kind of the end of the mechanical work now. A little bit more welding to do, for which I'm probably going to need to go and get another bottle of gas, because we've got to make some tabs on the top of the battery box to mount the charger and the high voltage junction box. But there'll just be some little folded steel things. They probably, famous last words, shouldn't take very long. But then it's into plumbing and wiring. I'm not going to finish that up in here, but I'd like to get a rough idea before I finally take the 300 off the road. So high voltage stuff's pretty straightforward. Not many of those cables. I've got my own crimpers now, so that shouldn't take too long. More worried about the 12 volt stuff, making sure that I've got a connector made up for the resolver on the rear motor. And then plumbing, as I say, the plumbing routing is going to be completely different. We've got a new radiator to mount. Going to mount at least one pump, maybe two, maybe just one, we'll see. But now that it's got that extra workload of cooling the motor as well, I'm wondering about putting a second pump in place. Obviously got to wire up, or rather plumb the heating as well. Not going to worry about wiring that up for now. I'm just really keen to get the 300 back on the road with the bigger motor and see how that goes. And we can worry about sort of progressive upgrades, heating, etc. once it's back on the road, because the way I've done things, fingers crossed, stuff should be pretty accessible. So that's that. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, found it in some way useful. And yeah, please do like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.